Today we're going to be learning how to draw a Bohr model. We use Bohr models to represent atoms and different elements found on the periodic table. So, when we're drawing a Bohr model, the first thing we need to draw is our nucleus. Inside of our nucleus goes two different subatomic particles, and those particles are the proton and the neutron. This is just an example. We'll get more into how to draw the Bohr model once we move on. Around the nucleus, in these shells or rings or orbitals or energy levels, this is where our electrons go. Now, depending on how many electrons, protons, and neutrons you have, will depend on the size of your atom, of your Bohr model. So, we're going to go ahead and give it a try. We're going to assume that we are drawing a model with 2 protons, 2 neutrons, and 2 electrons. Remember, our electrons and our protons always have the same amount. So if you know how many protons there are, you can always know how many electrons there are, or vice versa. So the first step is we're going to draw our nucleus. Now, to draw our proton, instead of putting a P for proton, we're going to use a plus sign. And that's because our protons have a positive charge. So for this model, we're going to put 2 plus signs because we have 2 protons. We also can see that we have 2 neutrons. Because neutrons have a neutral charge or no charge, we're going to draw those by putting zeros inside of our nucleus. Now, our electrons do not go in our nucleus. They go outside here in our electron rings. So, we will draw our ring around the nucleus. And to represent the electron, remember, they're negative. So we draw just a negative symbol, just like that. This is a Bohr model of an atom that has 2 protons, 2 electrons, and 2 neutrons. Now, the Bohr model can get a little more complicated than that, so I want to go ahead and show you the rules of our Bohr models. So, again, inside our nucleus, we have our protons and our neutrons. If we have 10 protons and 10 neutrons, we'd fit all of those inside of our nucleus. So it's important to draw your nucleus large enough that you can fit all of your subatomic particles that need to go inside. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. In our first electron ring, it can only hold a maximum of 2 electrons. That means this model we just drew, its first electron shell is full because we have 2 electrons. If you have more than 2 electrons, you're going to have to draw another ring. This ring here can hold 8 electrons. So if we had an atom that has more than 10 electrons, we're going to have to draw a third ring. This ring can also hold 8. Now, when you get into high school and further into chemistry, this may not be the same rule. This is the rule we use in 8th grade here in Denton because this keeps it simple and then we don't have to start going into subshells. So for 8th grade science, we remember the first ring has 2 electrons, the second ring has 8, the third ring has 8. In 8th grade, we really don't build atoms much larger than this. If you have more than this amount of electrons, so 16, 17, 18, if you have more than 18 electrons in your atom that you're drawing, we would just go ahead and add a 4th shell. But really, we only need to remember that we have 2 in the first, 8 in the second, and 8 in the third. So let's go ahead and practice that a couple times. We're going to draw a model that has 3 protons, and it has 4 neutrons. Now, what happens if we don't know how many electrons? Well, if we know how many protons there are, we know how many electrons there are. Because remember, protons and electrons always have the same amount. So, we were able to fill in that missing information. First thing we do is draw our nucleus. We're going to add our protons in. We have 3 protons, so we would do 1, 2, 3 plus signs. We have 4 neutrons, so we're going to do 4 neutral symbols, which is just a 0. And now we have 3 electrons, so let's go ahead and draw our electron ring. How many electrons can go in that first ring? 2. So we can add 1, 2. But this atom has 3 electrons, so we need to add that second shell. And we would add 1 electron in here because we needed 3 total. 1, 2, 3. And this is a completed Bohr model. Let's try it one more time, but with a little bit more subatomic particles. Let's say we have 11 protons. Because we have 11 protons, we know we have 11 electrons. And our neutron number can vary. When we start learning about the periodic table, we'll learn how to find the number of neutrons. Okay, so first things first, we draw our nucleus. I'm going to draw this one slightly bigger because we're going to have to put a lot of particles inside of here. We need to put 11 protons. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 protons. Then we need to add 12 neutrons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now here come our rings. That first ring can only hold 2 electrons. So we're going to go ahead and draw 2 electrons. We still need 9 more. The second ring can hold 8 electrons. So we're going to draw those in. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 10 total, but we need 11. So we're going to have to go ahead and draw that last ring with our last electron on it. Now we have 2 in the first, 8 in the second, and 1 in the third, which equals 11 electrons. You can see the more subatomic particles you get, the larger your Bohr model is going to become, from 1 ring to 2 all the way to 3. I'm going to tell you a few rules about this model. Rule number 1, you always fill the first shell before you start a new shell. So because this Bohr model only has 1 shell, there's no reason to draw 2 or 3 shells. Because this one has 3, we have to fill up that first shell first before we add into our second. Same thing here. We have 11 electrons. We had to fill that first shell first before we moved on to the second. Once that one was full, we could move on to the third. So always fill the first shell, and that's the shell that's closest to the nucleus. Always fill it before you start a new shell.